I think over the last 10 years, and I'll just use St. George as an example, the other cities are
less impacted,
but we still do it for them as well. But St. George has the largest population. I think we're just under 15 million that we've given in transient room tax to the city of St. George for things that they're working on that fit under destination development. That's not marketing dollars. I'm talking like the pickleball courts and the Pioneer Parkway or the Pioneer Trail up by the Sugarloaf and all of those things. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Again, if you were going to have those are all things that St. George resident hasn't gone up Pioneer Park.
It's amazing. I bring everybody who visits here, I bring up there because it is the perfect opportunity to be like, you want to know where I live? Let me show you.
But if you parked up there, if you walked on one of the trails, somebody has to maintain that.
It's my office like 3 days a week. Like, I just go park up there.
So that takes money.
Hey everyone, the St. George election this year is incredibly important. Go to votestg.com to see who's running and what they stand for, or visit us at our voter booth at Digby's Market, Red Rock Bicycles, or down in the park.
Hey everybody, welcome again to the 435 podcast. I got Commissioner, it's the coolest title in Southern Utah. County Commissioner Adam Snow here. We talked about history of Southern Utah. We talked Dixie. We talked water, economic development. This is a great conversation. We hope you enjoy it. Make sure you get out the vote. VoteSTG.com to get a list of all the now down to 6 candidates for the St. George City Council elections coming up November 21st. The CD2, the Congressional District 2 election is up on November 21st as well. We got that on Vote STG website as well. Enjoy this episode. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Send it out to anybody in Southern Utah with interest. We'll see you out there, guys. This is what I was talking to Lori Mangum about the power and the municipal power and how there's such a disparity between Santa Clara and St. George, right? And so like if they were to, merge the municipal energy companies together, it really only hurts St. George and helps Santa Clara. But over time, like the long tail, my argument was like over the long tail, solidifying and making it cheaper for the consumer, but also having reliability, a little bit more stable reliability. It seemed like that was a better option. She still felt like, there's just so many different opinions as to, this city wants to get power from these types of sources. And this city wants, like Hurricane is invested in that nuclear, like those small nuclear power plant. And Lori was like, it doesn't make sense to like be an owner in it when you can just buy the power from them. Right. Yeah. So all these conflicting opinions, she said it just makes it kind of difficult to navigate through, but
we can talk, with the municipals coming up. I mean, we had the first round, but with the general election coming up, we can talk about, you just tell me where you want to go, man.
Well, let's start with, since we're already rolling, let's start with just your history and maybe do the typical, because if they don't know you, who's Adam Snow and where'd you come from and where you are now?
Yeah, and nobody knows me, by the way. Yeah. Nobody. So I've gotten my hair cut by the same lady for the last at least, I don't know, a year and a half. When I went on Saturday again, she's like, I'm sorry, I know you do something. You're a city council person. Where do you work again? I'm like, holy cow, it's been every 2 weeks for a year and a half. How have I not been able to ingrain this? But this is just local government. A lot of people don't pay attention to, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's wild.
Adam Snow. My family settled Washington County. Erastus Snow was my third great grandfather. That's who Snow Canyon is named after. And he was the one they named after him. He's the first mayor of St. George, and he was the one that led the expedition of the 300 families down here to settle the area as a cotton mission.
I can't imagine, like, just thinking of coming down here, and especially like back then in the wagons, and thinking of like the terrain and the temperature changes and like all the extreme stuff. It's like, what were they thinking? What were they thinking?
I heard we had our building dedication yesterday, and there was
that's right.
There was a quote that was given during the dedication. It wasn't from Erastus Snow, but he did say very similar things, and it describes the most inhospitable place. There are no straight lines anywhere except for perpendicular outcroppings of rock and hell. I mean, it was just like, it was, there's no usable timber within 1,000 miles. Like it was a rough spot. I agree with you. There's no way I could not. I don't know how they did it.
Yeah, the best spot really is like Santa Clara. Like you come down, that side of the county and, come through Enterprise coming down that way. That's kind of the easiest. It's still not easy, but that seems like the best spot. But
you just upset everybody in Washington City, by the way.
I know. Well, it was, you look at the history though, Washington City, if it wasn't for the cotton mill, it wouldn't have.
I live in Bloomington. How dare you, sir?
Yeah, Bloomington, the rock, the bats and the scorpions.
I don't know if I like Jeff's voice just coming in all of a sudden. I don't know how I feel about that.
Jeff just chimes in from
I can pull some stuff up on the computer too.
If we want to pull anything up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my family's been here forever. I have two homes. I did live in Southern Arizona through high school. And I went to the University of Arizona for my undergrad, but we always had my family always had a farm. My cousins, my aunts, uncles, my grandparents, everybody, we always had a home here as well. And so this was just as much home for me as anywhere else. And so as soon as my wife and I graduated from grad school, we were like, well, obviously we're going back to St. George.
Is that where you met your wife?
Yeah, her brother was my roommate.
Oh, crazy!
So he set us up, so it was
cool.
Good.
Nailed it. Yeah. Perfect. And then I think you said you went to Pepperdine.
Pepperdine, yeah. So I went. I got a couple of master's degrees. I got an MBA in finance there as well. At Pepperdine, great place. Not where I wanted to live. Yeah. And Malibu's kind of expensive.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah. So came back here. I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. Started and owned and sold numerous companies, real estate development. I was a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley for a while here in St. George. I've owned a venture capital firm. I teach at the university, entrepreneurial finance there and many other classes, but that's the only one I teach now. I just can't give it up. I love that one.
Yeah.
And then for the last 6 years before being elected, I'd been working in politics since high school, and one of I was working for Congressman Stewart, helping run his campaign, and then he had a guy retire, and he asked me to come work on the legislative side, not the campaign side, help write laws and help solve a few problems. And I said, yeah, I can probably do that for a year. So I left my firm, went and did that, and I ended up staying for 6 years as his director, and was actually leaving. I figured I'd put in my time, was leaving, had told him I was going to be done and get back into the private sector. And I was actually in escrow on buying some companies and just get back into the private world. Yeah. And I think people should serve and then get out. And Commissioner Dean Cox's cancer had come back.
Oh, yeah.
So he called and a few people asked if I would run. I said, no. I don't want to be a county commissioner, thanks.
Yeah.
And that's not on my dream job list. And a couple months later, they said, well, would you reconsider? He's not doing well. I said, no. And then his wife called, which I thought was quite unfair.
Yeah.
And she said, would you please throw your hat in the ring?
Yeah.
You're the guy that the county has called for a lot of the issues being, from Congress. And so I said, okay, I'll do this.
Yeah.
I'll do this briefly.
Well, I mean, this is something that coming from the outside in, I think there's a knee-jerk reaction with a lot of people to be like the establishment, the status quo, there's a problem, right? And so like if they've been in it or they have a history in it, they tend to look at them as like having some, they've carved out some, place of power in there and they're like unwilling to give it up. And I can see that perspective, and I can see how, especially if you're an observer and not an active participant in the process, how it can come across that way a lot of times. And at the same time, as I've gone and gotten deeper and deeper into this through the show, but then just getting more actively involved in general, I've realized the pool of candidates that are willing to do really important jobs is really shallow. And like using the St. George City Council is just like a small sample size of it. You end up with I think 18 ran to begin with, then it was 16, then down to 14, And of those 14, getting 3 really good quality candidates out of those like 18 is like, I'm still like, well, I don't know, like the 3 best ones. I don't know if the 3 best ones are in the top 6, right? I'm not actually even sure if the best ones are there, but they were the ones that were really willing to raise their hand. And so I can see how at that county commissioner level too, is that you have somebody with talent, with experience in the public sector, in the political world, but then also in the private sector, somebody that can, live in both categories. It's a hard job to find those people to do it.
Well, and it's a horrible job.
I can't imagine.
It really is. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy it at all.
Yeah.
My wife asks me all the time, like, why are you doing this? And there really is. And I know this sounds cliche and there's far too many jaded people, but this is the truth, is that I thought I could help.
Yeah.
Right. Like I mean, and I ran against 12 other people. So that was a very full field as well.
Yeah.
And there were some wonderful people that and for a lot of this job, I think that this is a partisan office. So for me, any good conservative in Southern Utah could probably handle a lot of what I do. Mm-hmm. But on water and on economic development, especially in regards to Zion, I knew nobody else could touch me on that. And that those were 2 critical areas that we needed somebody with some experience. And that's why I finally acquiesced and said, okay, I'll do this. I'll do this at least 1 full term. It's going to take me that long to kind of move. I don't need to score a touchdown, but I got to move the ball far enough down the field. If I'm going to do it, I got to have at least 1 full term to give me.
Yeah. What's the term for the county?
4 years.
4 years. And how many years are you in so far?
2. So I'm only filling a special election to fill the rest of Dean Cox's term. So I'm up. I'll run again next year. Just because I'll need that 1 full term at least. But there really are good people at the city, at the county, at the state, at the federal level. There are good, honest patriots who are, and it's easy. And honestly, it's pretty intellectually lazy for a lot of people to be like, nope, they're all crooks. They're not all crooks. Yeah. And having worked in Congress for 6 years, people would say, I hate them all. We need to do a full line change. Get everybody out. How do you feel about your congressman? Great guy.
Yeah.
Great guy. Love him.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I met him. He's really nice.
If everybody does that, then that's why we keep having the same people in Congress. We keep electing the same people. So, but there really are good people that are doing this for the right reasons. And they're saying, look, I think I can help. I've got some expertise. I've got some knowledge in this issue. Let me bring that expertise to bear here.
What do you, because a lot of times because we brought up being a conservative, and that's something that's been super a hot topic, at least in the St. George City Council, is like, what is a conservative? What's liberal? Because it seems like we've run into this scenario, and this is nationally too. It's like, it's zero sum. It's like you either toe this specific conservative principle line or you're not conservative at all. Yet there's nuance in the job. Like when you're actually in the job, having to make decisions, it can't be zero sum, because then we'd never get anything done. There'd never be any movement, to the left or to the right, right? There's just, it doesn't seem like there's ever going to be, movement if you get stuck up in this. It's got to be 100% this way, and if it's not, then it's a no vote, right? And that's not reality, right?
It's not reality, and that's a great way to put it. I actually, as I was at the rodeo last night, and I was talking to a friend for a while, and we were sitting there, and I just said, she was actually bringing up that same point, and I said, the problem with we'll take the U.S. Congress, but this applies at all levels. In different forms. But the U.S. Congress is the easiest one for most people to understand. I said, if what is a conservative? To your point, I believe strongly in the Republican Party platform. Mm-hmm. I think that is the best way for America to maintain liberty, personal liberty, independence of government overreach, but also having a set, an established set of rules that we can all know, expectation management here. How are we all going to live together in a society, right? Mm-hmm. I think it brings the most capitalism. I think that has lifted more people out of the depths of poverty than any other form of government in the history of the world. And so for those things, that's why I'm a conservative. It's what I believe in, right? But if you take when you talk about those nuances, so think about the very first bill to drop in Congress, to be introduced, we call it dropped, to be introduced in Congress on day one, which is a 2-year Congress, right? A session, is House Bill 1. Mm-hmm. The last one to be introduced is House Bill roughly 10,000.
Yeah.
That's about how many we get in a 2-year Congress.
Wow.
You can't vote on all those. It's impossible to thoroughly vet. And some of those are messaging bills and they're never going to see the light of day. Some of them are just too small. You know, I want it to get passed, but it's not a big enough national import. So they'll stay and die in committee. But even if it was half of them, 5,000 bills,
Yeah.
how are you going to do that? So what they do is they combine them. I don't love the process, but it happens, right? They're going to combine them. And so let's just say there's 100 bills get combined into one so that we can actually get something passed. And let's say that there's 80 items in there that are strong, conservative, you love them. There's 10 items, you don't really care. It doesn't bother you either way. And there's 10 things you don't really like.
Yeah.
How do you vote? Is that a conservative bill or a liberal bill?
Yeah. It's hard to say because, I mean, depending on the person's perspective, those 10 could be deal killers. Maybe even one of those 10 could be deal killers
Absolutely
for the whole entire bill.
For me, there are certain things that you put one of those in there and I will not.
But what if 10% of your constituents do believe in those 10 items, right? Like thinking about, am I representing my entire constituent base, or am I only representing the ones that voted me in, which I think ends up being a big problem too. It's like, well, these people voted me in, these people didn't vote me in, so I'm not going to represent them. I'm going to only represent the ones that voted for me. And that's not really what that's not really the job. The job is you get voted in and then you represent all of the above.
You do, but you can't take like so using, because that's a good analogy, but you can't say, okay, well, I've got, roughly 20% of Washington County is more Democrat than, either moderate or Democrat. About 80% is fairly conservative. Okay, so 20% of the votes I'm going to go against what I believe to be the right thing to do, but only to try. I don't govern that way.
Yeah.
I govern with the way I think. I think that 80% of this county has elected me to do what they think is the right, because we have the.
So 100% of the job is to represent that 80%, right?
No, not to represent the 80%. I'm representing all of them, but to represent what I think the best decision is moving forward that will benefit all people.
Yeah,
Now,
that makes sense.
20% of the people may disagree that is the right way forward, but I was elected to say this is what I think is the right thing to represent the population. This is the right way to move forward on an issue.
So what should we do with those 10 things that you're like, I don't believe in that? Do you
it's
say
going
no
to come
to it?
down to sometimes.
Yeah.
Depends on how egregious they are. If they're kind of, I can probably swallow them, then you're going to vote yes, maybe, right?
Yeah.
If they are horrible things, I mean, there's some absolute poison pills in my world that I would never vote yes on, and I don't care how much I love the 80. You put one of those in here, and this thing is dead for me, right?
Yeah, it ruins the whole thing.
And so, but then people say, well, your heritage score or this. Well, all they have done, all of those are just people's opinions saying, well, is the 80% better than the 10?
Yeah.
Or not? And it's subjective, right? It's how people are ranking. And so there are people that say, I voted for this. And wow, you look like a great conservative. And then the other person says, I voted against it, but for this reason. Oh, you look like a great conservative. Well, you voted on the other side of it.
Yeah.
One votes yes and one votes no, and you're both a conservative on the same bill.
Yeah.
How does that? Because it is all very, very subjective. And honestly, legislating is hard.
I think this is why the public, the general public gets lost, right? It's why your hairdresser doesn't know who you are, right? It's because it's like you just start getting into the weeds of this particular thing. We've grown into this monster government that's taking on all these different things. I was going over the county budget, and Jeff and I specifically have been going over the St. George City budget pretty in depth, right? Because we're really trying to understand what's waste, what's not waste, what's conservative, what's not conservative, right? And generally speaking, across the board, we have a pretty conservative budget, but it grows just over time, and you take on certain projects that kind of create a life of their own, right? I think it back to this idea that the founding families of Southern Utah, we went from being a stop on the way to somewhere else, right? St. George was like, hey, people were going to California or Arizona or Nevada, and they just go through St. George to, we're stopping in St. George. St. George is the destination. Yeah. And thinking of like golf courses. We started with a golf course, and what that kind of snowballed into, and now it's a $6 million line item in the budget. Is that what they necessarily intended it for? No. Would you say that that's a conservative thing? Now, maybe, maybe not. Yeah. But at the same time, what did that create for the county? And that was kind of a catalyst for economic development that really kind of sparked, where we've become, what we've become, for better or for worse, right? Depending on who you're going to talk to. But I think generally speaking, overall, for the 80%, it definitely did really good things. And so, looking at it, we can't always project out and see, the decisions we make one day are going to, create into this other thing. But, it's like the TRT tax, like thinking of how big was the anticipation when they passed. I don't know if you know too much when did that pass? Do you remember when the
transient room tax? That was implemented a long time ago.
Long time ago.
Yeah,
I can't imagine they would have expected the revenue coming from that is what it is today.
Not at all.
Not at all.
But that's a great one. So let's take that one for a second. First of all, like I'm impressed that you and Jeff are diving into this budget, right? Because it is is this Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff's.
Oh, okay, he's
Jeff's bringing it up.
Jeff's freaking me out again.
There's a ghost in the room.
Yeah. So you've got this tax. Now some people are saying, well, this is our tax. You know what? That's true. But it's really a tourism tax. It's transient room. So these are not citizens here in Washington County. This is somebody who has come from somewhere else, almost by definition, right?
Yeah.
They're staying in a hotel or an Airbnb, and they're paying 4.25%. And then that gets divided up in different ways. But no, nobody had a clue. We've had our greatest years over the last couple of years in transient room tax because of COVID.
Yeah. We
stayed open.
Yeah.
We stayed very free, right?
Yeah.
People in Southern California and everywhere else that were so restrictive said, I can at least get outside. I can do stuff in this place, called Dixie, this is Southern Utah. I'm going to go to this place called St. George. I had people that they didn't know, people from grad school and stuff from California, friends from around the country said, hey, dude, I'm in your neighborhood today. Like, how did you get here from Arkansas?
Yeah.
Not how, like,
physically
playing,
how, but yeah, like what brought you here? Yeah.
Zion.
Yeah.
And so Zion is the second busiest national park in the whole country, and it drives a ton. But so we take transient room tax and we try and develop. I don't think the proper role of government, this is just my opinion, I don't think the proper role of government is to build the economy by picking winners and losers and trying to really force things. Mm-hmm. I think the proper role of government is to set the table and let the private sector come in and actually make the meal.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what transient room tax does. We try and have private industry, nonprofit, somebody's going to try and do something. We can take those transient room tax dollars, which are very restricted under state law, and push to help with marketing, to help people get there. You mentioned golf. We've obviously got the PGA coming and the LPGA to Black Desert here. And we've got, so we've got a lot that's going on.
I think just recently what's the music festival? The Hero Trail Music
Hero.
Trail Hero
Music
Festival.
Which is like the coolest combination of four-wheeling and concerts.
Yeah.
Right?
Down in Sand Hollow, they were talking about having 50,000 people go through the gate at Sand Hollow a day.
Huge.
A day. And I was like, that blew my mind. And then I was looking at some of the comments I'm legitimately going to stay out of the comments. At first I was like, it's not that big of a deal. The comments aren't that bad.
The comments are the best.
But they're like, you're ruining the most beautiful place ever by, putting all this stuff, out and building around Sand Hollow and things like that. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, so it would just be a dirt field that people look at if you don't actually have anything to do while we're, going and enjoying, like, how are we supposed to enjoy this, right? This whole thing. But the Trail Hero, it sounds like such a cool thing. And I had saw at that last county commissioners meeting that they, put some marketing dollars to it, because part of the transient room tax is that you have to do that, right? That money has to go to that,
Adam,
those things.
Can you talk about why it's so restricted? Or in other words, if the city is collecting X amount, yearly, why can't the city just say, hey, we're going to utilize this amount of money for marketing, but we've got all this extra money we weren't necessarily expecting this year. Let's take care of a couple other things that have nothing to do with tourism.
Yeah, I can. So the transient room tax, TRT, is basically an agreement between the tourism associations, the hotels and restaurant associations, and the state government. So that's why there's restrictions in place, is because they said, that's fine. We'll put a tax on ourselves, on our residents, on our people coming, not county residents, sorry, our clients coming to stay at our hotel. But you've got to then use the tax
to help us keep people coming,
to keep things coming through.
Like just take St. George City, for example, or I mean, even Springdale, they can't, I mean, the city can't do anything with it. It's out of the city's hands as far as the revenue goes. From
where
actually cities have a little more leeway, but they don't get as much of it because we mark it as a region, not as an individual city. So cities get a portion of transient room tax, but it's not as high as ours, as the county level or the state level. But that's because you don't want to have cities trying to compete. What would be the different marketing play between St. George and Washington City? They're very, very similar, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and somebody who's coming to stay here doesn't care.
Right.
They're a couple miles apart.
But a lot of times they don't realize they're one versus the other.
No, they have no idea. So we market the region, right? We don't want St. George marketing Zion National Park differently than Springdale markets it, but they have different interests. So the county takes that over, and that's why we get a larger portion of transient room tax, but we also are more restrictive in how we can use it. And so we are trying to we push. Jeff, your exact question was like, why can't we just use it for whatever we want to use it for?
Essentially, yeah. Like, why is it so restrictive? I mean, I've heard a few times, like at city council meetings and just chatting with people, that hey, if we bring in $1 million, I'm just using numbers, but if 1 year we bring in $1 million extra in tourism, why can't we use that to, I don't know, fix up the Sandtown?
So we do.
Sandtown.
We do all the time. So Washington County residents get a ton of benefit off of this. So roughly half the money goes towards marketing and roughly half of it goes towards destination development is what the state law calls it out as. So if you've played soccer or pickleball out in Little Valley, that was paid for by transient room tax dollars.
Yeah.
Because we justify that under state law to say, yeah, we're going to build these soccer fields out here and these pickleball courts, and we'll have these big tournaments come in. And anybody who's been here in February knows that the big soccer tournaments come in all the time and they use those fields. So it's a proper use of the funds under the law. But guess who else gets to use them every other day of the year?
Yeah.
The residents of Washington County, and their property tax dollars didn't go up. We know that on average,
that's such a good point.
Because of the money that we're able to take from transient room tax and spend on things, facilities and infrastructure here in the county that our residents get to use, if you were to provide those same level of services without the transient room tax, every single property in Washington County would be about $1,200 higher a year in your property tax.
Yeah. Say that one more time.
Roughly $1,200 a year higher property tax if we didn't have transient room tax to provide the same services. Now you could say, well, we just wouldn't build soccer fields and pickleball courts and gym, other things that we do. But if you were to continue those things that we all enjoy using, TRT is paying for them.
You know what just popped into my head that gives me a ton of clarity, and I had not thought about it until just now, is thinking of how all these things are folded together, right? Like we have Parks and Rec in these silos with the cities, but then you have a county that has the transient room tax, and they're saying, no, I got to spend this money, right? We've already promised we're going to spend this money. We're talking to the tune of, I think it was the transient room tax. I think it was it 24 million?
I think it's 21 is what we're expecting.
21 million. I think that was in the budget for 23. Yeah, it was like over 20 million. And going back to when they collected, they're like, oh yeah, thinking of, we're trying to do a geo bond in St. George for 29 million over the course of 20 something years, right? Yeah. And we're talking about, this is revenue in a single year coming from this tax, and we got to spend half of it on marketing and half of it on, develop, what'd you call
Destination development.
Destination development. Infrastructure, right?
So
like
Tuacahn, right? So St. George Musical Theater has a lot of people coming from out of the county.
So back to this, like with this blending together, is like the pickleball courts and stuff like that in Little Valley. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're spending that much money, at the city. They're like $100 grand or something like that on like covers, like the sales and stuff like that. But thinking of, well, the county pitched in to do all of this to make the pickleball courts, right? Everybody's pitching in. So if I'm sitting there in the city council and I'm like, hey, should we be putting, sunshades up over the pickleball courts? Everybody else, the county included, is sitting here like, listen, we have this plan here and you're saying no to one piece, just one little part of the plan. And just because you say no doesn't mean that the plan's done. It just makes it not as good of a plan, right? Because we're trying to look at it from this macro, is that there's so many things that are intertwined. It's almost like the buses that I think the state of Utah, there was a grant for buses to, bus people from St. George to Springdale specifically because we're dealing with some labor issues. And I'm like, we're spending how much money on that? But this is where the state comes in, right? It's all getting folded together where we're trying to make complex solutions at complex levels with different entities going together. And I hadn't really thought of that. I think we think that we're all operating in our own little entities, but there's a bigger master strategy being played that we can't forget.
Yeah.
I think. And that's something that the light bulb kind of just went off. It's like, it's not.
I think over the last 10 years, and I'll just use St. George as an example, the other cities are
less impacted,
but we still do it for them as well. But St. George has the largest population. I think we're just under 15 million that we've given in transient room tax to the city of St. George for things that they're working on. That fit under destination development. That's not marketing dollars. I'm talking like the pickleball courts and the Pioneer Parkway or the Pioneer Trail up by the Sugarloaf and all of those things. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Again, if you were going to have those are all things that St. George resident hasn't gone up Pioneer Park.
It's amazing. I bring everybody who visits here, I bring up there because it is the perfect opportunity to be like, you want to know where I live? Let me show you.
But if you parked up there, if you walked on one of the trails, somebody has to maintain that.
It's my office like 3 days a week. Like, I just go park up there.
So that takes money.
Yeah.
And so I think we give $800,000 or so to that project. Obviously we have to keep marketing under the law. And there are people that are like, look, the word is out. Why are we still marketing?
Yeah.
Because that is the law. Utah.
We're going to have to change that.
Again, this was an agreement between the industry associations putting a tax on us, but then we get to be the beneficiaries of the tax as well, at least a portion of it. There are places that have done away, other states that have the same thing. I mean, almost every state. Utah's not the only one. Obviously, you have resort taxes and transient room taxes anywhere you stay. And that's a way for tourists to help pay for things, for the impacts that they leave on the economy when they're here. But some have gone away from any kind of requirement, and you just get to, hey, those are your dollars, and they go into the general fund, and you can use them however you want. Many of those are regretting those decisions now because that if you don't keep marketing, ask any business how well they continue to survive.
Yeah.
If they don't sell their product.
I was told this when I got into real estate is that this is true of real estate, but it's true of any business person. Whatever your job is, you have that job you were hired for and lead generation. You're going to capture a new customer. Your job is to capture a new customer and then whatever job you were hired for. So if you were taking out the garbage, you got two jobs. Bring new customers in and take out the garbage, right? And if your business isn't operating with that thought at the beginning and all the people working for it, the business isn't going to survive because there's going to be downtimes in the market. The economy's going to slip. You're going to have floods. You're going to have, challenges, like with St. George City, where, I can't remember specifically, but the provider of a specific fire suppression company went out of business, and now they're having to do a whole new purchase, like $3 million worth of equipment that they're now having to buy because this other business, a private business, went out of business, right? And I thinking about the golf courses, right? The reason St. George City owns 4 golf courses is because 2 of them were rescued because the private developer couldn't do the job. So, these are those nuances that I think people just tend to forget, right? And we want to, make these strong lines in the sand of, hey, it seems this simple. Why can't we just do it this way? But one thing I want to bring up with the tourism thing, and I hear this a lot, especially in the comments, but I've heard it specifically as I've been doing the podcast, is being an advocate for a locals day at the parks, like a locals only at Sand Hollow or locals only at Zion National Park, right? Because, as a local, we live here. I legitimately have not been to Zion in the last about 2.5 years because of the zoo that I know that it is. When we moved here, I moved here in 2015. Christmas Day, we went up there. No trams. We saw like 3 people total, right? We drove all the way up to the end of the canyon. It was quiet, beautiful. It was snowing a little bit up there.
Which
it was
is the best
amazing
time to go, actually.
I know. But now they got trams running on Christmas Day.
Yeah, not the rest of the winter though.
I know. But the point being is that
Yes,
in like a really short amount of time, probably since you've been elected. No, I'm just kidding. Just in a really short amount of time, that the word is out. It became one of the most trafficked So thinking about locals, are there some things that we could do to make like a locals only day, at least for the state parks? It seems like we could be advocates for that.
We probably could through the state parks. Obviously, that's through the Department of Natural Resources, which is state parks is a division of that, and that's at the state government level.
Have you heard? Has anybody brought that up?
We have certainly brought that up, and I think that would be at the state level. That's much more of a viable option.
Yeah. Doing it at Zion is going to be
Zion. We have actually proposed that, and they're like, "But you don't own this park. The people of the United States do." So I'm supposed to tell somebody from Arkansas you can't show up today. I don't know why I keep picking on Arkansas today. I don't know.
It's just
we'll go Kentucky.
Go Razorbacks.
Tried to get out here, and
it's because BYU's playing Arkansas on Saturday.
That's why
they got a great baseball team. I like the I like Arkansas Razorbacks. They're a good baseball team. It's a good
so could it happen at the federal level? I'm going to say probably everything's possible.
Yeah,
everything's possible.
Maybe once a year,
but I don't know that it's going to be likely.
Yeah.
But yeah, the when you talk about city budgets, and I don't want to we don't micromanage on or try and influence on cities how they deal their budget. They're elected to do those things. So how they spend their money, I think they should do what they think is right based on what their constituents have elected them to do, right? But know that when it comes back to tourists, and we do harp on tourists a lot here because we have a lot of them, 6.2 million tourists a year in Washington County.
Crazy.
That's a lot. I was in Hawaii for the Ironman World Championship last year, and I was with the mayor. They don't have
Would have been
cities.
2 years ago? I think the World Championship, he was here last year. So it would have been 2 years ago?
Well, we had 2 world championships in the same year. So we had 2021 was actually held in 2022 here, and then that fall they held 22 back in Kona again.
Got it.
And they don't have cities in with their own mayors and stuff in Hawaii. They have the county government, right?
Yeah.
So I was sitting there with a mayor who'd flown us out with him, and he said, it's Hawaii. I mean, we're just so busy. I said, how many visitors do you have? He's like, I've got like 2 million visitors a year.
Whoa.
And we were like, yeah. And he's like, what? How many do you have? I was like, over 6. And he was, he's blown away. Like, how can little Washington County have, 3 times as many visitors as we have?
I had no idea. That blows my mind. Because
that's the Big Island. That's not all of Hawaii.
But
the Big Island.
thinking of, because I say this all the time, St. George, it's an island in the desert, right? We're like a desert island in the desert.
Yeah.
And it's such a destination. We, instead of water around us, we just have sand, right? Yeah. Like it's just, we're surrounded in sand. A lot of sagebrush. It's a long drive. You got to kind of fly in, right? If you're going to come from far away. So that's so crazy to me that it's 6 million versus 2 million on the Big Island. Wow.
Huge number of people come in here. So we know the impacts. Again, if you've ever tried to drive around in the spring, drive down River Road and the Boulevard, like it is a parking lot.
Yeah.
And so there are negative impacts. But 27% of St. George's city budget, their general fund, comes from the taxes that tourists pay, not transient room tax, the sales tax on things that the tourists bought at the grocery store and at, wherever they bought stuff in retail. 27% of that budget comes from tourists.
That's wild.
That's insane. That's blowing my mind right now.
Yeah. So again, if you wanted to have all of those services, your police, your fire, all those things that come out of your general fund, 27% higher for St. George City residents without tourists. All of a sudden, tourists may be not quite so bad, right?
Well, and I think the tourists aren't necessarily draining on those public services either. Then now, I'd probably amend that. Probably somebody's gonna fact check me, but I would say that emergency services, EMS does, but thinking of like the daily, patrol. And, we deal with transient crime, right? Because we get crews. I've heard this from several of the local police officers where you get crews that come up from Vegas and then they, hit a bunch of the tourist spots. And so there is some impact and cost that comes along with that. But do you think overwhelming their cost on the infrastructure is higher because of them?
No,
or is it
is a net savings to the citizens here. Tourists are helping offset your property taxes.
Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. There's costs on both sides, but then there's also overwhelming benefits on both these sides as well, right?
Yep.
So thinking about
let's see if I can blow Jeff's mind again here. Zion National Park alone, just the park, $967 million a year to our economy. That's roughly an eighth of our economy comes from Zion alone. It's our largest economic driver by far.
Wow. I got steam coming out of my ears over here.
I mean, our GDP for the county is $8.3 billion.
So
just under $1
and people
billion.
wonder, how do people afford these massive houses in Little Valley? It's like, well, because there's a lot of businesses that are doing really well.
They're capitalizing on the people coming here spending money. So here's kind of a maybe putting two and two together, because there's a lot of a few candidates in particular in the St. George City Council race that kind of the quote unquote tagline is, we've got this inflated budget, and we've got this huge mismanagement. I shouldn't say huge, but mismanagement of funds at the city level. I mean, we've got a $500 million budget. So, you talk about those two little points. I mean, we're talking $1 billion and then 27% of the general fund. I mean, that kind of begs the question. I mean, look a little bit further into the budget. Where is it inflated? I mean, we're getting, and I'm sure it is. I'm sure there's some, Rob and I talk about this all the time, right? Like we can delineate some of the little things down, but when we're talking, 27% of the general fund coming from other people, I would probably make the argument that we're using the funds fairly wisely.
Yeah.
At the city level, right? I mean,
you're talking about the revenue, right? So 20% of the revenue comes from tourists. It doesn't mean how it's being spent. And I'm sure that there are things that every city, and I know because I'll just speak to the county. I won't speak to the cities. But
there's
the
waste
county
everywhere
alone,
for sure.
We are always looking at ways we can try and tighten our belts.
Yeah.
Right.
As every business does, right? Is that any, I think the budget, it's like $167 million or something like that for the county.
Yeah, most of that we actually look at about a $40 million budget.
See, in this like the general fund of like stuff that you're managing on a regular basis, but then you have capital expenses and things that you're just like, these are reoccurring funds that there's nothing we can really do.
Stuff and all that.
It's the same thing in St. George City, million. Right? So 40 is the general, the total, a large budget, over 100. I think it was 167. There it is, right there. Yeah. General fund 43 million at the county level. So in St. George, it's 119 I think million is their general fund, right? And that's really what we're trying to say. This is what's going to be funds that we can reallocate, right? If we're going to tighten costs and things like that. But at the same time, are we cutting off our nose to spite our face, right? Is it we're trying to not spend money in this thing and then ultimately end up having an impact? Because I think. Let's stick with the county budget. As you look at the county budget and how it's grown, what is it that you think really takes up? Now, I guess I think the budget's it's a lame topic, truthfully, in my mind, because I think we have such we can get lost in the weeds when it comes to the money.
It's so boring.
It's so boring. So boring, but it's so polarizing.
But yet it's so important.
It is so important. I'd rather go. Let's transition. I think a little bit because I wanted to talk about like the Dixie spirit and what that means versus what I think colloquial, what the word Dixie is versus what is Southern Utah and having your family, founded the area. I know a little bit of history of Dixie State, which is now Utah Tech University. Maybe give anybody listening, like if they hear the word, why do they have Dixie on a rock, up above the city? Like maybe give some history there.
Easy. Every county in Utah, so the pioneers come into the Salt Lake Valley. Mm-hmm. From there, they said we've got to be able to sustain ourselves. We're out here in virgin landscape, so to speak, right? We need all the materials that make a society function. And so each county was kind of set up with their own unique, what can you provide? So some of the central counties with high mountains, that was your timber areas, right? Which is where most of the 66 sawmills that we used to have were in the mountainous areas because they could provide the timber that we need. Iron County is named that because they have iron mines, right?
Yeah.
So they have iron ore that we could mine. We were Dixie because we were the cotton mission, and where do they grow cotton? In the South.
Yeah.
We were the southern end of the state. We grew cotton just like the South. The South is known as Dixie, so we became Utah's Dixie.
Yeah.
And that's honestly where it comes from.
That's the plain and simple answer, right? And the cotton mill, truthfully, sustained those families that settled down here, is because even though they Santa Clara technically is the first established city, with the flooding that Santa Clara had over year after year after year of getting here, right? Because taming the Santa Clara River and the monsoon seasons and the rains, they weren't dam experts, that's for sure, right? They're like, we're not quite sure how we're supposed to handle this amount of water all at once, right? And so if it wasn't for the cotton mission, the families wouldn't have been able to stay down here. And I think there's a lot of that strength comes in, what came around that cotton farming. So then progressing that forward, the university, it didn't start as Dixie State.
No, St. George Academy.
St. George Academy. And it grew into Dixie. And then basically starting in the 90s, the identity started changing kind of in the 90s, because I think they took on the Rebels.
Yep.
So it was like the Dixie Rebels, and they used the Union Jack, the Confederate flag for a while there, and then they stopped using that.
Obviously, I was not an adult at the time, right? So I was a little kid, but I don't remember 80s and 90s. They made some transitions from using more of the Confederate, the flag.
It was a mascot.
As kind of the mascot.
It was a mascot. And then in the late 90s, they kind of had gone past that, obviously, with sensitivities, right, that come up with all of that. But the Dixie State itself kind of remained because of this Dixie spirit at the end. Yeah. So maybe walk me through just a general story on why did they change the name? Were you for the name change? Because this comes up a lot. I hear this a lot. It seems like it's still this. There's a bubbling conversation around locals around this being something that, because I hear this all the time. The people from up north want to change us down here. It's a us versus them. It tends to be.
Don't Salt Lake my St. George.
Don't Salt Lake my St. George. Yeah. Don't California my Utah, and don't Salt Lake my St. George. So maybe help me understand it. Maybe somebody listening, and if they're coming in the middle of this whole thing, they're like, what is the deal? Why do I keep seeing these articles about this?
So the short answer is no, I did not support the name change. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty vocal on that. Mm-hmm. I didn't think it needed to change. I don't agree with the reasoning on it. I can see where some of the arguments came from. I just think when you have the fastest or one of the fastest growing universities in the state and in the region, obviously people were not being put off by the name. I teach there.
Yeah.
I still teach there.
Mm-hmm.
I have taught there for many years now. My brother is a professor there. My dad was, I think, he's student body president when he was there. And I mean, I have a lot of my family has gone there. I feel close to the university. And twice throughout the history of the university, from the time it was started, twice the community has stepped in when the state the church the first time, and then the state was going to just close it down. The community came in and said, no, we want to keep this university in our town, mm-hmm. college at the time, right? And they put up the funds and they helped it limp along and kept it. And so there's even more of that. It's not just, hey, this happens to be a school that's in our town. It's no, this is our school. We've paid for it twice. And so some of the reasoning, excuse me, some of the reasoning on the name change did not sit well with a lot of people. But I think there are some compelling arguments on some of what the university did and some of the surveys that they had. If you look at a broader national or international perspective, I don't think that those apply when you understand why the name is what it is. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's obviously some, in my opinion, just some woke people that are going to be upset about everything. So you could have named it anything else. And I mean, we had to change Aunt Jemima, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we had to Pearl Milling Company or whatever it is now for the syrup. Like, I think that people that just want change because some people just need to be angry about something. And I'm not saying that was, the university necessarily, but there's some people that are going to answer the surveys and things that the university relied on because they just want to be angry about stuff because it's really easy and we've become so affluent for our own good.
Was the timing just happened to be the timing? It sounded to me like there was potentially a change when they changed from the Rebels to the Trailblazers. It seemed like it was almost like there was a long transition that they kind of had set this in motion before 2020 and with some of the cultural wokeism that kind of flared up from 19 to 20 and 21. This is probably the wheels were in motion before this, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a reaction. Like, I think the Aunt Jemima thing was like a full blown, like, knee jerk reaction to the cultural.
Right. And just to clarify, I'm only saying the Aunt Jemima. I'm not saying that's what the university did.
No.
The
Yeah.
people that responded to the surveys that the university is relying on.
Timing wise. Yeah. Like right in that time.
Some of those are the same people that are responding are going to be upset about
that.
Aunt
That
Jemima,
makes sense.
and they're going to be upset about anything because they're just very angry people.
That makes sense. Okay.
But that informs then the decisions that are being made.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I agree with you. I think it was a long, slow burn on some of this. Schools around the country have been changing for a while. Again, I mentioned earlier, I went to the University of Arizona for my undergraduate. Wilbur the Wildcat was our mascot. He's a weird combination between a cougar and a bobcat because he's got a long tail, but he looks like a bob. I don't know. He's just a wildcat. So if you call it wild, it can be anything you want.
Yeah.
Who's a cowboy. He's got a cowboy hat and he used to have guns.
Yeah.
Right. He had two revolvers.
Pistols.
They took away the guns that left the holsters, which is weird. And then they took away the holsters. But that happened over many years. And there's still people in Southern Arizona give Wilbur his guns back, right?
Yeah.
They were big foam guns. They weren't real.
Yeah.
But like that was.
But we were the West. It's the West, right? It's the Wild West.
He's a wildcat cowboy. Like he was cool.
Yeah.
And now he just has the cowboy hat.
And I could see how, man, thinking about, because they changed the state flag, we go through these transitions. It's like, well, are we just we're euphemisming. That's a horrible.
I like that word.
Euphemisming.
Sure.
We just keep changing the definitions and the way we look at things just keeps changing. Yet, the thread of the culture is trying to stay the same, right? Yeah. It's like this battle between. So, do you think that there's enough pressure that they would ever go back to Dixie State? Because I hear that there's like this coalition that's trying to get it to push back to Dixie State.
There certainly is a coalition. I would like it to go back to Dixie State. My read of the tea leaves of the legislature, which is the only one that has the authority to do that at all, is that they wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. What do you think
about the brand though now? Picking Utah Tech, right? And having the brand for Southern Utah be technology.
I think there's a lot of good, honestly, that comes from that. I think there's, because they haven't done away with other programs. They're still, the university's adding programs all the time, degrees, moving more into bachelor degrees and graduate things. I think there's doing a ton that is actually really good. We're working with them on some things that, the innovation district and I'm on the steering committee for that. And I think on Monday, we've got a pillar, the 4 pillars that they're really trying to focus on. I think it can be a great thing for the economy. And I think they're really trying to actually do their job under state law of what their mandate is to work with the economy, with the local community and the labor force and all the things that they're doing. I think in a lot of ways, the university is doing a really good job and trying to fulfill their mission.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I agree with every single decision.
Yeah.
But I think that they're doing a good job. I just don't think the legislature, that was a bloody battle.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they want to jump right back into it again and reverse it. And mainly it's the northern-southern issue, right?
Yeah. You
had most of the southern and rural people voted against it, but we're just so overwhelmed by the Wasatch Front. And it's just not their community. Many of them, when I talk to them, trying to lobby them, like, why is this such a big deal? It's just a name. And I'm like, yeah, but If I was
part of
gonna
the heritage,
change
yeah.
BYU, would you care? Well, no, you can't change it. No,
Yeah.
you can't change. That's BYU, of course. But they just didn't. There was a huge disconnect. And
Yeah.
I don't think they want to jump back into a fight that they already got beat up on. In their mind, it's settled.
Yeah, and
I could be wrong, but I don't think that they would pick it back up.
it seems like this is going to be a constant battle though for Southern Utah. Is that it is we're a different demographic. We're the heritage, the culture here is different, and it's changing all the time because of the net in migration. Right, we're changing out the locals. Truthfully, it's hard to stay local. It's hard to grow up and stay here because of we got a big economic gap, right? And so, kind of segueing into that economic development, because the two things that you felt like you could really run on, as far as what you can achieve. We talked. You talked about water and economic development. Yep. I think this is a good transition into economic development. What do you think are the looking forward down the road? What are some of these milestones? What are the focus areas that you're trying to do to impact that?
Well, that's actually a great segue. Well done on that one. But I would say also just chiming on that last thought with the North versus South, the Wasatch Front versus the rural, there is a perception that we're still just this small little. You're the playground for the Wasatch Front. We go down there, and anybody who's tried to drive from Salt Lake to St. George on a Friday afternoon, it is a parking lot.
Yeah.
I-15 is
a
lot of taillights because this is where they come to play. Mm-hmm. They don't realize we're the 5th largest
city in the state.
And like politically,
St. George is, but
you can't win without Washington County anymore.
Yep.
You can't win statewide office.
Yep.
It's just mathematically highly improbable. You'd have to carry every other area so high to negate our voice. So we have grown a ton. Mm-hmm. Our economy has grown a ton. What happens here affects everything in Southern Utah. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about the economic drivers here, like I said, Zion is number one. Mm-hmm. We have some real challenges because, as you mentioned, you don't want to go to the park when it's so overcrowded.
Yeah.
Some days it is that way. Don't go on Memorial Day. It's the worst day of the entire. That's their highest day of the year. Labor Day, any of the holidays are going to be bad, right? But there are days during the summer when I was there in August. Not a problem.
Breeze.
It was so easy. You could have parked almost anywhere.
Nice.
So we're working on things. The Park Service looks at it and says we have an overcrowding problem. This is not the experience that you're supposed to have when you come to a national park. And they are right in some of what they're talking about. 46 minutes of every hour, the tunnel is shut down.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
So 14 minutes, you've got two-way traffic going through. But every time an oversized vehicle comes from either direction, you've got anybody who's tried to drive through there, they've got an attendant at either end of the tunnel.
Yep.
And they radio through, okay, shut it down.
Yep.
And one-way traffic gets to go through because the tunnel was not built for these huge RVs and tour buses that we have now.
Yeah.
But and then so that'll all come through and they say, okay, the bus is through, open it back up. And it'll be open for like 2 minutes until another bus comes from the other side. Up, shut it back down. So that's why we get 46 minutes of every hour that it's made.
That's crazy. I didn't even realize that.
It's huge. The buses can't stay in their lanes. When they come down the switchbacks, they have to cheat out into the lane. Luckily, there hasn't been any major car accidents, but technically they're also illegal.
Yeah.
So they're saying things like that. That's not the experience you're supposed to have waiting in traffic to get through the tunnel for 35 minutes when you came to the national park.
Yeah.
So we're working with them. So one answer would be, let's just shut off the park. We'll just we'll need a reservation to get in and everybody will need a reservation. So good luck if you're local.
Yep.
You don't
Not
get
gonna
any
happen.
preference over anybody else. And we're just going to limit it to a certain number of people and that'll solve the problem. And they're right. It will.
Yeah.
That would also hit our economy. Even a 20% reduction, you're talking about roughly a $200 million a year hit to our economy. We can probably survive that, right? Like I said, we've got $8.3 billion GDP. We can probably survive a $200 million hit. Garfield County, Kane County, Wayne County, they die.
Yeah.
Because if the tours and the people that come, the grand circle as we call it, they start with Zion or sometimes they end with Zion, but if they can't hit Zion, they just don't come.
Yeah.
Because as nice as Capitol Reef is, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool if you're 20, 30 something and you can get out and hike for a long way, but it's really hard park to see if you're there with little kids or you're elderly.
And there's really, outside of the park, there's nothing else.
Nothing.
Right? So like unless you're that's the only thing you're going for. Whereas Zion, you can do Zion, but then there's a bunch of other things that you can do around it. Tons of stuff.
So we're trying to help the parks solve their problems more with a scalpel than a sledgehammer. Yeah. And say, okay, you've got issues with transportation through the tunnels. How can we get people through the tunnels easier? Mm-hmm. So I just talked to major universities this week, trying to talk to their propulsion departments and their engineering to say, can you take this as a passion project? Because right now we have shuttles going up the main canyon, or Zion Canyon as they call it, but not anything going from up the switchbacks and through the tunnels to the east side. So we're missing a huge portion of the park that's really cool.
It's so awesome.
It's really cool over there, but nobody can get there.
Yeah.
Unless you have a car.
Yeah.
And so we can't move people through the park very well, but the shuttles that we have aren't powerful enough to climb the switchbacks.
Yeah.
And they're too tall and too wide. So I need a vehicle that is short enough to fit through the tunnel, narrow enough to stay in its lane, powerful enough to climb the switchbacks, and hinged to make the curves.
I got a good idea.
And enough people, big enough to take enough people.
Are the buses natural gas powered? Is that why?
And and they need to be clean.
So I was just looking at this, and I'm looking at the time, and I know they got another podcast coming in, so we got like 15 minutes.
Okay.
But there's this Chinese company that they've basically created, it's an electric tram, and it's like a bus, but it stays on a painted line. So it's like a light rail, and they've basically allowed it to, it's completely automated. There's no driver to it, but it just follows a painted line.
Okay.
And the only challenge is crossing like intersections, which seems like this would be the perfect, because you're just trying to go from point A to point B. You're not crossing any traffic. It seems like that could be a good option. I just don't know the size, just like the size of that vehicle. You're right. Like you got to get the one that, needs to fit a lot of people, but you almost need like a train, right? You almost need like
honestly,
a train.
that is my idea would be, well, not the train. We've actually had that thrown out as well. The train would be difficult, but if you've gone to Disneyland, and the Park Service hates being referred to as like being compared to Disney.
Of course it does, yeah.
Which is, I almost take a little pleasure in.
I know, but it's kind of true.
It is. And Disney's really good about moving people around, giving them an experience. But if you think of when you've had to park at Disneyland and the caterpillar looking shuttle tram thing that takes you from there to the main gate, that idea would honestly be a great way. It's multi-hinged, right? If you had a powerful enough tractor on it, the propulsion of the system to make the switchbacks. But how cool would that be to go through those tunnels?
The Tesla engines, like the torque in the electric engines, it got to be enough.
We're trying to talk to Tesla right now to see if they'll take this as a.
I even thought, because I've talked to a couple of the city council members about public transportation just around here, and truthfully, county and state, it would be the best because of the cost of public transportation. Because if it's a loss leader, we know it doesn't make money. What's the most efficient one? Because what I think we end up doing is we piece together buses, which is the kind of the most affordable and tried and true option. And it's always a lag, right? It's always like we're adding, as it's overwhelmingly needed, instead of getting in front of public transportation and saying, hey, it's going to lose money. It's never going to make money. So what's the best system that we can put into place? And so I've gone through a bunch of different options, but I was like, boring company. Let's talk them into doing a subway in southern Utah, and just have them come out here, and we'll be a test. If they're doing it in Vegas, we could do it here. And then I talked to geologists, and our geology is just so crazy. Rough. Just the aquifers, the water, hard rock, soft rock. We have so many different mixes of things. There's no consistency, so it's like super expensive. But going to a Tesla model type electric, it'd be powerful enough for sure to get up there.
But then you've got to, so you can do that, but then you've got to have charging, right? Yep. So it drains a ton of the battery to get up. So then what kind of infrastructure do we need to charge? How many of those shuttles do we need?
The answer is diesel. It's always the answer is diesel.
Diesel.
Roll coal, baby.
Coal is not diesel. Those are two different things, aren't they?
It's not the point.
They are two different.
Those are two different things.
Don't get caught up on the details.
We're just splitting hairs here.
He's just going for the one liner. He's just going for the one liner.
Splitting hairs.
All right, with the 10 minutes we got left, what's your overall? We've talked about water a lot, but think macro level, Washington County. Are we on track with water? Because I get a lot of people worried that they're like, we're going to run out of water. We're not going to make it. We're overbuilding for the water that we actually have. We have a complete disaster on our hands. What would you say to them?
Calm down.
Settle down.
Yeah,
I agree.
So just a couple weeks ago, we rolled out and this is not just me, I've helped with it, but the Water Conservancy District, Zach Renstrom, if you talked to him on the show yet.
Not yet, but we will.
You need to, because Zach is phenomenal. He's a former county commissioner. He's an engineer. He's an attorney. Now he's the water manager.
And his sense of humor is the
And he's
driest,
funny.
He is
funniest.
hilarious. I love
Super
Zach.
funny.
It's the best.
And have tremendous respect for him. Rolled out the 20-year plan. 20 years is important. Obviously, coming from real estate, you know that, because banks need to know that you're going to, if I'm going to lend on something, you're going to have some guaranteed supply for the next 20 years. I think we're going to make it by on the skin of our teeth.
Okay.
But honestly, we will, I think if we implement the plan as we've spent so much time working on, and this is not a Lake Powell pipeline thing, this is an internal only, right? But through reuse, secondary water, trading out things that we're using culinary water for right now and using irrigation shares instead, we will make it. It takes a ton of work, but Southern Utah home builders and the cities and by and large, everybody's on board because they realize that a third of our economy is based around construction. And if that dries up, that hurts.
Yeah.
That hurts a ton. If we do nothing, we're out of water.
Yeah.
Like by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But if we've actually overplatted already, the cities have already overplatted what's
I
the
brought
water
that up,
availability. But if we implement these reasonable restrictions on new growth, nobody's going to come and tell you have to take your lawn out unless you want to, right? Or you can't plant your garden. But on new growth, hey, functional turf. The thing I hate the most is those little figure 8 looking weird pieces of grass in people's lawns, in the front yard. It's covered by red rock, and then there's this little
patch of grass,
10 feet of grass. Why?
Yeah.
What is the point of that? Plant a nice bush. Shade the ground. I don't want to make a heat island.
It's like facial hair where somebody just grows it right below the lip, right?
Yeah.
You're just like, what is the point of that little tiny piece of patch of hair?
Milk.
It's the flavor saver.
It's the flavor saver.
No, it's nasty.
It's nasty. But you're right. I mean, but grass is just one thing, right? And so
grass is a big one, though.
Grass
But
is
reuse water, all of this stuff. We can treat every drop of water in the entire county right now.
reuse is the big.
We have nowhere to store it.
And then that's where the graveyard wash.
Graveyard, dry wash, Toker that's being built. If you drive to Cedar City right now, you can see the big old black pipes. That is for Toker Reservoir right now. So we're working on all these things, and that is the number one question I get having been since in the last 2 years since being elected. But also people say, you know what, can we just stop already? Can we just stop all the growth? When is it enough? Let's just stop building. And my first question is, and when did you buy your house?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been here for 8 years. And if we had said, let's shut it off 9 years ago, how would you have felt? And the real answer is that we have this much water and I don't know which camera. We have this much water and we're right here. So we still have some room to grow, right? And I'm a private property rights person. I think that
going back to the conservative, you can't be conservative and then also say we're going to keep private property, or we're going to.
You don't get to build your land.
I've seen that on Facebook before. People arguing back and forth about how we should just not let anyone else move here, and then people that have moved here in the last couple of years, we should kick them all out. And these are like on conservative Facebook pages too. And it's like, wait a minute.
And it's short-sighted. And also I would say this is that it's putting us into a pressure situation to get innovative with what we have to do, which Southern Utah's always had to do. We've always had these problems. We've always had infrastructure problems. It's always caused us to have to be creative. And I'm saying we because I'm an adopted member of the community at this point. But I have zero intentions of leaving, right? And I don't want to California, Utah, right? I lived in California for 10 years. That's not right. I lived in Southern California. I don't want that for St. George. I drove through downtown Corona that had zero planning when it came to development and how much of a nightmare the traffic is, right? I don't want any of that, but we have the opportunity to where we have pressure. We have pressure with population growth and infrastructure. We have these pressures, but all that is doing is causing us to get creative, get innovative, and solve the problem, not run away from the problem. Saying we're gonna upend private property rights, that doesn't ever make any sense. And only 11% of the entire county is privately owned anyway. So from a land use perspective, we're going to end up like Hawaii, right? We're going to run into the ocean to where we can't go anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge that the county faces all the time, is federal lands versus county lands in the cities, and utilizing the resources that we do have. And when we're fighting the federal government to be able to come up with solutions, right? Because we don't want to be a super tightly dense community. No. We don't want that. We want to have spaces where it feels like we can have an acre or 5 acres or 10 acres. But what ends up happening is that with no planning, which is what I think we've made mistakes in the past on, and I've talked about Little Valley a bunch on this, but I think that's a great example of urban sprawl where we mismanaged development and really come into a plan on it. So looking at the county level, balancing that economic development with the resources that we have is the biggest challenge that we have.
You said that perfectly. I mean, when it comes to water, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And it has forced us to look at different ways rather than just, okay, we'll just bring it in a pipeline from somewhere else and we'll keep doing everything that we've always been doing. We'll just bring another source. I would hope that would still happen someday, but it is intellectually lazy for so many people to be saying, shut it off. I'm here now. So let's just shut everything down. We'll keep it a nice small community. My family started this place. Yeah. So can I go back to 1851? Yeah. Can we do that? And nobody else gets to move here. But guess what? I wouldn't live here either because I didn't live here in 1851. Yeah. So my kids, me, my parents, none of us would be here either. So that's a really lazy way to think. Yeah. How about let's solve the problem? We need to grow. There's communities in this state that are dying, and they would love to have a growth problem. But let's grow.
And St. George, Southern Utah, has been in those scenarios.
It has. But let's grow without losing our soul. Yeah. And it does take us to get creative. So my third great grandfather, again, that Erastus Snow, he beat Brigham Young to the Salt Lake Valley by 2 days. So my family, we celebrate July 22nd instead of the 4th of July.
Nice.
When you read his journal, the first thing he did was move water from where it was to where he knew he needed it. Yeah. He adapted to the limited resource to try and make it work. What we now call City Creek. He didn't call it City Creek then, but that's what in the 6 hours he was in that valley before he rode back up the canyon, he started moving water. When they came here to St. George, they moved water. Yeah. They adapted to the limited resources. They tried to get creative. We've done great things. We built Quail Creek. We built Sand Hollow. We're building a bunch more reservoirs now. We can solve the problem. We have a very clear plan to do it. We're working on the financing for it now. I'm very confident that we can implement this and we'll make it through. We can grow at a reasonable rate without losing our soul, and we can still maintain a high quality of life. Saying cap it all is just lazy.
Yeah, we need more creative solutions. We need to keep bringing solutions to the table, right? Stop thinking about pointing out all the problems and saying, or running from the problems. If you feel like you got an idea, I think let's come to the table with ideas on allowing us to keep going, right?
And we've got and we got to wrap here, but with the city elections coming up, none of us have ever claimed to have, as elected officials, have ever claimed to have every good idea. If you've got a good idea, please bring it. I will sit down with anybody, as I do every day of the week. We talk about solutions. Some of them, maybe you don't have all the information, so it seems like a good idea, but it may not work. Others, that's a great idea. Let's do this. Right. We had one this week at the clerk's office. They're implementing a different procedure. Nice. Because of something that somebody said. Hey, have you thought about doing this? And it was great. Yeah. But when we're looking for people to come with those solutions, look for workhorses, not show ponies, right? Somebody who can, hey, I've got ideas. Because if you just want to ride in parades and stuff, which is honestly the worst part of the job, but if you want to ride in parades and seem like, and go to lunches that the people invite you to and ribbon cuttings, that is not who we need. Yeah. You don't want people who want this job. You want people who want to work.
Get to work.
And have some creative solutions of their own and can bring other coalitions together to actually solve problems. And that's how we have a community that has been very closely unified for so long and works together. between Santa Clara, Ivan, St. George, Washington, all Hurricane, Laverkin, Tocqueville, all the way. We work together constantly on these things.
Yep. We got to stop driving wedges between them, right? We need to stop focusing on the things that make us different and focus on the things that make us the same and things that we agree on and come together and collaborate. Hey, thanks for coming. Thanks
for having
There's
us.
a bunch of other stuff we could talk about
We'll do it
too.
again sometime.
Oh yeah, for sure, man.